Hello writers, and welcome to this little talk on thesis statements. What are thesis statements? Thesis statements are typically, in the 5-paragraph essay, a sentence that appears towards the end of the introduction that clarifies to the reader your position and why you hold this position throughout the essay. And I say in the classical five-paragraph essay because it is a nice place to have a thesis sometimes, but also the more adept you become at writing, the more you'll want to move the thesis around, perhaps make it implicit rather than as a direct sentence, and play around with it. However, do I recommend that you have the thesis statement clearly articulated, possibly at the end of the introduction, for the purposes of the writing of the first essay? Yes, I really do. Just so that we can isolate it, look at it, before we have the confidence to play around with it. So what is a thesis statement other than your position and why you hold it? Well, this position that you hold is not necessarily an argumentative position. Sometimes it's your analysis of a situation, what you see and how you've interpreted it. So if you are looking at a text that is perhaps a film and you are saying, this is what I think it's saying, that in itself is a thesis statement, right? As long as you provide reasons for why you think this is the case. The next thing is, when you construct your thesis, you need to think about whether this position that you have can be argued effectively within the scope of your essay. Even books that are much longer than your essay will usually have one main idea, right? Their thesis might not be in a statement. It might be written in a way so that it spans several sentences and perhaps several pages, but at the end of the day, it's usually saying one main thing. So that main thing that you're saying has to be supported with a reasoning that is clear within the thesis statement. The thesis statement is not a placeholder for ideas that you will expand on later, right? So it has to be something that can stand on its own. All right, so let's clarify what we're talking about. This is a sample thesis statement that was written collectively in a workshop that followed a class reading on the chapter Moderate Pressure, that's the title of the chapter, from a graphic novel titled Palestine, written by Joe Sacco, right? And Joe Sacco is a journalist, an award-winning journalist and graphic novelist who spent time in the occupied territories and in Tel Aviv, and he spoke to people on both sides of the conflict, and instead of doing straightforward journalism, he collected his experiences in a graphic novel. And it's interesting because he shows both sides of this conflict, but at the same time, his opinion and his sympathies become obvious when you look at the book. I mean, the book is titled Palestine. So we looked at this one chapter, and we had obviously done a lot of brainstorming at the invention phase of the writing process, and we'd looked at resources on how to interpret graphic novels, and this is standing on a great deal. It didn't just come about spontaneously. And we refined the language, and we did a lot of work to arrive at this thesis statement. And I'm saying this just because I think that the thesis statement is the blueprint for the essay. And therefore, we spend a lot of time working on a thesis statement, and it's the result of a great deal of mapping and note-taking and work that's done at the invention stage of writing. All right, so let's just analyze this thesis statement that looks like it's very neatly done, but it belies the kind of effort that went into it. In his chapter titled Moderate Pressure, in his graphic novel Palestine, Sacco uses visual and textual details to belie the Israeli claim that only reasonable stress is applied to interrogated Palestinians and exposes it for the plain torture that it is, Sacco also shows how this random degradation has become a facet of Palestinian daily life and how the entire Israeli state is complicit in the crimes against humanity perpetuated against Palestinian detainees. Now, this is not the perspective of the people who are doing the workshop. This is the perspective, this is what they think Sacco was saying, all right? So in that sense, even though this is their analysis of Sacco, it is also argumentative because this is what they are arguing Sacco is doing, right? You see how that is? Now, because a lot of work went into this thesis statement, it was done with the understanding that this thesis statement was going to control the entire essay. So if you look here at the three different colored highlights, the first, second, and third highlight become the first, second, and third sections, all right? So the first part on how only reasonable stress is applied to Palestinians, how that doesn't seem to be true, and how it is in reality torture, becomes the topic sentence, obviously rewritten, not in the same way, of a very strong section or paragraph, depending on the length of this essay, where a lot of supportive details and strategies are highlighted to show that this is in fact what Sacco believes. The next part, how the random degradation has become a facet of Palestinian daily life, becomes the second section, okay? So a lot of the details that will be in this section will be on randomness, evidence that this is random, and evidence that this is mundane. It happens every single day, right? And the third section or paragraph shows how Sacco is implying somehow that everyone has blood on their hands, right? How everyone is implicated in these crimes against humanity that he sees are being perpetuated, right? And again, if this looks too neat, it's because it is. Writing a thesis statement is a recursive process. You expand on an idea and then you realize it's not what you promised to do, and you go back and you change your thesis statement. You look and you think that your thesis statement is a little bit vague. It needs a lot more focus. Things have gone in an unexpected direction. In general, I keep refining my thesis statements until the very last draft. So it's a very dynamic process. Okay, so let's go through a cycle here. How to make a thesis statement. And this, again, let me remind you, is from the source cited here, How to Write a Thesis Statement by Professor Lauren Forster. Just this particular one here. How to make a thesis statement, and this is his example. So once we've brainstormed the topic, we come up with a number of things. And brainstorming is what we do in class when we're mapping, when we're pouring our ideas onto paper, when we're free writing, when we're taking notes. So we decide that we're interested in the problem of crack babies, which are babies born to mothers who are addicted to crack cocaine. So we have crack babies. Now that's not a thesis statement, that's a general subject. I don't know what you want to say about crack babies. So you need to narrow down the topic. There's loads of things that you could be doing here. However, what interests you is programs for crack kids. Now programs, still, I'm not quite sure what to say. Who's running these programs? How old are the kids? What's in those programs? Narrow it again. Governments should develop programs to help crack children, so it's not babies, crack children cope and compete. More attention should be paid to the environment crack kids grow up in. Okay, that's very, very interesting because it identifies who is developing these programs, what programs we need, and who they're directed to. All right. More attention is interesting. Let's see what happens here. The environment. What do I mean by the environment? Do I mean I'm going to be taking them away from their parents into foster care perhaps? Am I going to be providing them with after-school activities? So I need to go back to my invention and say, my invention stage of writing and say, yeah, I mean, what do I mean by environment? And then I find that in my invention part of the process, I found really good sources on how there's a strong connection between the cognitive and emotional environment that is provided to crack babies versus babies in normal homes. And I say, experts estimate that half of crack babies will grow up in home environments lacking rich cognitive and emotional stimulation, right? This is not your thesis. This is possibly before your thesis in the introduction when you were giving the background of the problem. And obviously you'd need a citation for this, right? And it's good because it leads nicely into the thesis statement that says, and notice how this is tighter than the one up here, because half of all crack babies are likely to grow up in homes lacking good cognitive and emotional stimulation. All right, this is the rationale. The federal government, I've identified which part of the government. The federal government should finance programs to supplement parental care for crack kids. So clearly, this is not foster care. This is parental care. All right? Is this a good thesis statement? Does it do something specific? Does it show your position? Why you hold this position? I think it does. You can write this paper. All right, so again, just to recap, thesis statement maker. Your position, which is a type of claim, 2 to 3 reasons why you hold this position. Now, it's really important that the reasons that you share are not placeholders for reasons. Sometimes we worry that the thesis statement will be too long or that it will give away everything I want to say and I won't have much to say later. That's a problem. If you feel that way, then perhaps you need to go back and do more invention so that you feel that you have a lot more material than and that it can stand on its feet. Remember when we talked about how writing is like an iceberg where the tip of the iceberg is showing, but so much more is going on underneath? That's so much more going on underneath. The more that's going on underneath, the more confident you'll feel about creating a very specific thesis statement. There's a new word here, a type of claim. What does that mean? What is my position? A type of claim. If it's an analytical position, then usually it'll be a lot more like the one that we looked at up here, the one from the chapter from Joe Sacco. It'll basically say, this is what I think is going on, right? And we recognize that that's a very debatable position because different people looking at this chapter will see different things. So in a sense, that's an argument. However, sometimes you're going to be making a claim. So what kinds of claims could you be making? Every time you make a claim, you should be aware that a counterclaim can very easily be made. So Japan has the highest quality of life in the world. I'm claiming this as a fact. Somebody can say, no, that's not a fact. That's actually inaccurate. Or I have evidence to suggest that your claim is outdated, for instance. Claims of definition are ones that seek to classify, to say this means that, right? So alcoholism is a disease rather than a vice. You'll probably find a lot of people that will say, no, it's not. It's a behavioral issue. It's not a disease, right? Therefore, there's room for debate. And there's evidence that supports both sides. And it really depends on how you're going to be presenting this evidence, which evidence is more recent, accurate, true, contextually relevant. Claims of cause. So this led to that, right, is usually a tough one. But for instance, social media communication has enhanced university students' writing abilities. Do you think this is true? Do you think this has led to that? That's definitely something you can argue around. Claims of value will say, is this moral, immoral, useful, useless, good, bad? So doctor-assisted suicide is immoral. Claims of policy are my favorite. What should we do about something? And usually your last essay is a policy paper. And for instance, what should we do about the problem of overcrowding in the hallways in the morning, for instance? Or something grander like, every American should have access to federally funded health insurance. And the word should usually tells you this is a claim of policy. This is what we should do about something. Now, I have 2 slides with thesis statements on them. And what I want you to do is to work in groups to critique these thesis statements. I have 1, 2, 3, 4. These were written by students in workshops and refined together. All right. What I want you to do is to go back to the top of this presentation, look at it, and work in groups to do it. Details in your mailbox. I hope this has been useful. Goodbye.